are, you know, when will they stop? Or like somebody who's like is a terrorist, you know, will stop at nothing. Whereas maybe if you just had some minimal controls, you might put off like a kid, you know, who's just trying to do mischievous stuff, and he'll stop it there. I just actually came from a conference where we had a physical penetration tester. So what she did was she tried to break in your building, right? And she tried to see, well, do you have stuff on your desk that I can just take papers out of there or go into your mailroom or whatever? And this is what she does for a living. So she does this to show people, here's how easy I can fool all your people and social engineer my way into your building. But she's got a different profile as a threat than someone who's actually trying to steal your mail, the stuff that's on your desk or whatever. So she'll always get through, but very low probability that she'll actually do anything because she'd be out of business. But someone who's actually trying to harm you, maybe they are as sophisticated as she is, but you know, generally they are likely to actually cause harm if they can get through your controls. All right, and then effect is confidentiality, integrity, or availability. Those are the common security terms you see. And I've also seen safety. So let's say if you've got some critical infrastructure and there's no fence around it, you know, it could blow up or something like that, you know, and someone can get hurt, that might be another threat, another effect, all right? So next. All right, then risk, and bring it up next and next. Okay. So this is how we're defining risk in fair terms. And this is really important because people just say, what's the risk? They don't quite make sure, like, so we're talking about everything. So in order to talk about risk, we have to have a loss event with the asset and the threat and the effect defined. And factoring it out, there's two components to that. There's a loss event frequency, which is a number account over time. Usually you want to annualize it if you're going to normalize it. And then loss magnitude is dollars. All right, so we want dollars and account. All right, next. All right, so this probably won't mean a lot to you, but when I present in terms of security teams, this is the type of stuff that they list is here's what our threats are. They're not actually threats according to FAIR, so let's just scroll through this quick. Get through these. So basically, I test people and I ask them, is advanced persistent threat, is social engineering, is social networking? These are not threats because they are not people, right? Hacktivists and organized crimes, like I said, those are examples before of people that have a certain motivation and a certain profile around what their capabilities are and what's going to stop them. All right, so let's keep going. All right. All right. So keep moving down the definition. We've gotten risk, we've got these two. Now, in terms of loss event frequency, it breaks down into a threat event frequency and a vulnerability. So a threat event frequency is how many times does the attack happen versus how many times does it actually succeed. So this woman who's the penetration tester, she would go into a building and she could get through their controls, but she never caused a loss event. So that's the difference between a loss event and a threat event. Is one is attempts, and then the other is of the actual loss of how many times does the loss happen. All right, and then vulnerability is how likely, giving all that you're doing to protect your assets, how likely is that attacker to succeed in getting to your asset. Is there questions so far? Melissa, this is getting a little bit technical, but we're good so far? Okay, let's keep going then. All right, similarly, loss magnitude has a primary and a secondary risk associated with. So primary loss would be things like your initial response costs, whereas secondary is the lawsuits that come later on, the class action suits. If you had to pay for another auditor come in and prepare you for your FTC audit, all that stuff would fall under secondary. And secondary losses are generally higher than primary losses. All right, let's keep going. All right. All right, so this is, it's kind of another, again, dealt more towards the technical teams. Let's just bring up the answer. So the vulnerability associated with the privileged insider is 100%. And I'll explain that in the next slide. Keep going. So I explained the difference between a loss event and a threat event. So this is where it kind of, we're down here. So I'm saying, when does loss event equal threat event? So this vulnerability, again, if you're 100%, your threat actor is, like I said, a privileged insider. They're 100% capable of whatever the job is. So let's say it's a database administrator. That's their job, is to administer that database. So they have the keys to the kingdom, and then there's no resistance. They've got all the privileges that they need. So when you have an insider who's like your system administrator, this becomes one, then this equals this. So the only things that really protect you security-wise when you're dealing with an insider is how often do they have contact with the asset, and how likely are they to attack it? Well, that kind of makes sense, doesn't it? And that's how you can manage the risk too for a privileged insider, is you put controls around those areas rather than, you know, some of the other areas. So that is the full tree, right? You try to work from the top down and estimate at this level if you can. If you can't, you have to go down here, and if you can't, then you go down here based on how much data you have. But let me kind of walk you through an example. Let's do the next slide. Okay. All right, so let's talk about a cleaning crew written on a sticky note, and they find the password written on a sticky note, and you want to see if they are actually, how much is it going to cost you if they exfiltrate your HR records of 15,000 employees. So the first thing you have to do is you define what's your tolerance for your organization. You know, what will put us out of business versus what's going to hurt really bad, versus what we don't really care about as much. So let's just say, for this example, $10 million and up is very high. High is over $1 million. And click one more time. All right. This is based on an industry report. It's called the Ponemon Cost of Data Breach Study. I just used a number of $148 per record times 15,000 employees is $2.2 million. All right. So let's just use it. It's not the best way, and there are better ways to get numbers, but just for sake of showing you how you manage risk using FAIR, I just want to get a number for this. So let's just say we're in the high category if this were to happen. All right, next. All right, frequency and capability level. So like I said, as we did the tree, let's define roughly how many times are tiers, and then also what's the threat capability. So the cleaning crew, if they're going to come in every day, they're going to be more than 100 times a year. So they're going to be very high. And let's say they've got average computer skills. They know what a computer, they know how to actually take a password and type it in to see if they can get to it. Okay, I'll see if the example makes a little more sense. I just kind of want to show you how we're getting to how the example works. So like I said, we're plotting, let's say we've got a tree like this, and this is how we're going to add things together that are not numbers. All right, just to show you basically how it works. All right, next slide. All right, so go, as I said, more than 100 times a year, and low probability of action. Let's say you haven't had a problem with the cleaning crew, right, ever. So those are going to combine into let's say a yellow. All right, keep going, Jim. Like I said, they've got average computer skills, but the sticky note's right there on the computer. There's no resistance strength associated with that. So we've got high magnitude in terms of our $2.2 million, and now we also have a high frequency, you know, given what we have. Go to the next slide, though. So we've made some assumptions here in that there's a term, do you guys know what multi-factor authentication is? That means like it's a callback code or something you have to put. So you can't just do with just your password and just your user ID and password. There's another thing you have to do in order. We're going to assume that there's no multi-factor authentication in play here. And we're going to assume you know, that the office is open, that they actually could go in there. Maybe there's other things you can do. So there's some stuff around there that we're assuming. All right, go to the next slide. All right, so we took away the sticky note, and we added multi-factor authentication, and then we dropped this to green and left everything else the same, all right? So it's picking which controls you want to put in to actually adjust the problem. So now you've got, you know, yellow and green, you've got another green, so you've dropped your vulnerability, and now you've dropped your loss frequency. Yes?
How do you figure out the probability of action?
Well, you can look at history, all right? You say, how many times has this loss event happened over a certain time, all right? So maybe there's, you know, competitors, maybe you've got tickets that you've already seen, you know, you can say, well, this has never happened. We've been in here for how, so let's say I'm gonna assume this happens once every 10 years or once every 25 years. So you come up with some numbers like that, and that's what you actually put into software, because I think Troy had a question about it, was their actual software. All right, let's keep going. All right, so this is the way risk used to be reported. Keep going. All right, like I said, dashboard with a bunch of colors and dials and controls, really not a lot of meaning there for an executive. But using FAIR with no fancy charts or anything, you can just say, we've identified that the loss of 15,000 employee records would cost the company in X and Y between $2 and $5 million. We estimate we could cut our vulnerability and frequency to this by 50 to 60%, because again, we were in, let's say, the top 16%, and by making those other couple controls we put in, we dropped to the lower 16%. So that's a 50 to 60% drop, just by enforcing a clean desk policy, locking the door, and maybe putting in that multi-factor authentication for whatever the amount it costs. So another example that I've used this on for one of my clients right now is in third-party risk, and I want to kind of talk about this since a lot of you guys deal with small businesses. So small businesses, they need companies to do a lot of their stuff for them. They rely on their vendors for things, and those third parties are a major vulnerability, or they're a major threat. I'll just say that, to small businesses. So most companies, they have a program called third-party risk management where you have to vet your vendors. You ask about their security program and what controls do they have in place. And well, third-party risk management was kind of having the same problem that the general security program is. This is, here's a company, rate this company's security program, and they're not really paying any attention to what services they're getting from that company. So when I brought this to the credit union that I'm working with now, so let's try to put some of these risks in context. And I start reading these reports by asking, what is the scenario we're most concerned about? This one, it was, they went out and they did field estimates for the business, and their assessors would put whatever estimates they had in there, and then they'd put it into some proprietary software, and they'd send that data to the credit union through this software or their portal or wherever they get it from, and then the business would make a lending decision based on what that assessment is. So I'm reading their security policy, and it just says they will train and background screen employees, but these field assessors are all contractors. They're not covered by the security policy. All right, so that's a problem. That's the service we're getting. That's not going to show up in any of the audit reports if they're just going through checklists, right? Then, well, what kind of technology are these assessors putting their estimates in? Are they writing it on a piece of paper and then going back to the office and putting it into the computer, and now you've got all these paper copies of these estimates floating around? Or can these assessors be bribed? You know, can they overestimate or underestimate the value of the asset and take something on the side, and then the business is making decisions based on corrupt data, right? So we want to know, you know, what type of peer reviews are done, or how do you know that the assessors aren't being bribed? So we go back to this assessor, to this company, and we start asking these questions like, wow, no one's ever asked us that before. So as I'm going through then more and more, I'm saying, what is the service we're getting? What's the risk we're getting? Because I was also finding these companies will not just, there's no